In this time of global crisis, we are feeling great care and concern for our community here in Vermont and around the world. We know that this has been a difficult time for many, and Soryu in particular is aware, having spoken with many of you, of the psychological and financial pressures of this time. We hope that these talks will be a source of support for you, whether you are new to us or have been connected with us for years. Thank you for choosing to listen and be with us in this way.
Happy Easter. Today is Easter, and Easter is a celebration of death and rebirth. On Easter, we celebrate how it is that if we allow our bodies to die, we are reborn. And we're reborn for the benefit of the world. Our rebirth saves the world. Our rebirth gives life to the world. Whereas if we refuse to die, if we won't die, then we cause harm, cause death in the world. And so we both celebrate the possibility that due to a spiritual practice, we are able to voluntarily die, and therefore save the world. We also have to be concerned with the fact that most human beings, the vast majority of human beings, see death as a real problem and haven't resolved that problem spiritually. And because they haven't resolved that problem, they end up doing a lot of things that cause killing in the world. And so we see that this day points us in the direction of celebration of the possibility of dealing with the problem of death so that we're willing to face it, willing to resolve it, willing to relinquish our lives, and the miraculous rebirth that comes from that. This is a celebration. This is positive. This is wonderful. This should uplift us. And yet, we also have to be aware that, in fact, this isn't generally the direction of human beings. Most of us have not faced death, have not resolved the problem of death, and so the only solution we have is to avoid it as long as we can, in hopes that, well, I haven't resolved the problem of death right now, so I'm not willing to face it or experience it, but maybe next year I will have somehow gained this wisdom, perhaps by avoiding death. And in fact, perhaps by causing death, which is to say, perhaps by killing others, I will gain the opportunity to deal with this problem. Human beings are so unwilling to die, so unwilling to not exist, that we plunder this planet. We feel that for human beings to die is the worst thing that could happen. Human beings shouldn't die. No human being should ever die, and if a human being dies, then that's a terrible thing. Well, if a human being dies, it is a terrible thing if we haven't resolved the problem of death. However, to hold the view that people shouldn't die is extremely damaging. It's extremely unskillful. And in fact, it is, as far as I can tell, the second most damaging, the second most evil view in the world. The only one more problematic than this is the view that it doesn't matter what you do. But this view that people shouldn't die is even more damaging, even more harmful than the view that all people should be killed. And why? Because by holding the view that people shouldn't die, we end up behaving in ways that will kill all people and also all beings. That's the direction that we're headed in, that we've been headed in for a long time. It's difficult for us to see this. It's difficult for us to see the degree of killing that this view engenders. I don't know that all people will be killed. I think, on the contrary, will cause enough harm to this planet, to each other, that will change our direction. Will make a shift. There's a very interesting text said to be spoken by Gautama Buddha. In fact, there are two texts right next to each other in the Digha Nikaya. One is called the text on origins, and the other is the text on good governance. And they're actually quite related. And if you look at what they describe, they seem to indicate that things don't just get better and things don't just get worse, but on the contrary, things get better and worse. Some things get better and some things get worse. Time passes and some things get better and some things get worse. It's a bit of a strange perspective for most of us who either hold to the idea that everything is getting better or that everything is getting worse. In a certain way, things get better because we gain the skills, we mature, we cultivate our minds, we purify our minds, and because of that, we can face the problem of death more effectively. That becomes a real possibility for us. We can face that there is suffering, and we can do something about that, and we get better and better at doing something about that. So, at first, we're not able to understand that there is suffering, that there is death, that we have not dealt with that problem, and therefore there's great fear of death. We're able to face that, and then gradually we get to the point when we can face it skillfully enough to actually resolve the problem of death, the problem of suffering. So in that way, things get better. Things are getting better in that way, because the capacity for that increases and many people take advantage of that. Unfortunately, things also get worse in that those who have not done that gain power. Those who have not done that have a lot of power. And as time passes, those beings have more and more power. This current situation with this famous coronavirus that so many people are talking about and thinking about right now is a good example of that. For a few people, this has been an opportunity to deeply face death, to deeply face suffering, and to increase our skill in dealing with these problems. But on the other side, we've seen that we've handed over enormous power to systems that have not dealt with this problem and continue to hold the view that people shouldn't die. That it's a real problem if a virus comes through and results in the deaths of millions of people. Now, this is very subtle. This is extremely subtle. If we don't actually mature our minds, then we can only hold simple extreme views. No one should die, or if you're claiming that we shouldn't do everything we can to prevent people from dying of this virus, then you're killing people. You're trying to kill everybody. You don't care if people suffer. Or people say we shouldn't do anything about anything. It doesn't matter what you do. So we'll just let all this happen. This way, we alternate between these two extreme views and make the opposite view into a meaningless statement to protect the extreme view that we're holding. But the fact of the matter is that people should die. We have the nature of dying, and to fight against that nature is to cause suffering. People should not kill. Killing is not our nature. And to follow that nature is to cause suffering. We can't say that this virus is a bad thing, despite how much fear we have of it, despite the fact that we have such fear because of a long time of being unskillful around death, in particular in pandemics like this. These pandemics happen again and again in history, and we've gone through them again and again, and we carry the trauma of that. And so we're very afraid, but that doesn't make a virus bad. Viruses, other diseases, are a natural part of life. This virus threatens no species. This virus doesn't threaten any species, including our own. It's not going to wipe out Homo sapiens. It's not going to wipe out any other species. We, on the other hand, threaten many species. Our species threatens countless beings and threatens to bring many entire species to extinction, including actually this virus. We shouldn't kill, and we even shouldn't kill this virus. We shouldn't eliminate this virus as you could say, living thing. It's a part of life. And yet it is our reaction to it. We want to destroy it, end it. This is because we haven't yet deeply faced our own death. We haven't risen to the status of, say, the Christ, the Anointed One. Interestingly, in the Sutta on Good Governance, it's also about one who has been anointed, a king who was anointed with kingship. It's interesting. So how do we come to this point of being anointed? Yes? That is, as some have mentioned, the meaning of the word corona virus. Corona means crown. So how do we get to the point when we are brought to sovereignty, brought to true power? First and foremost, it's by facing death and realizing that fighting against our nature, and our nature is to die, causes suffering. There's a famous story of a man who went to a Zen master. And he said, "Master, I would like a sign, I would like a calligraphy to put up over the door of my house to bring good fortune to my house. I hope that my house is one of good fortune." And it was a tradition at the time to put calligraphies, beautiful calligraphies, we have some here, up over the door. We actually have other signs like this around the building as well. We've taken this tradition a little bit here, to put that up over the threshold of the main entrance of a house, to bring good fortune to the family. So he said, "Master, could you please make a phrase, a teaching that would bring good fortune to my family?" So he looked at him, and he knew that he lived there with his father and with his son. And so the Zen master wrote out, grandfather dies, father dies, son dies, and gave it back. The man was shocked, completely shocked that this would be good fortune. He thought, uh-oh, this Zen master is evil. Just like a lot of people probably now after I've given this talk think, I'm evil. A lot of people think, oh, an evil teacher. This is what the man thought. Oh no, I had faith in this teacher, and now I find out he's evil. He thinks that good fortune is that my father dies, and then I die, and then my son dies. And he asked him, how could you write something like this? And the master said, well, what could be better than that first your father dies, and then you die, and then your son dies? Would you prefer that first your son dies, and you have to experience that as a father, and then you die, and your father has to experience that? Is that what you would prefer? There's nothing better than this. This is the greatest good fortune. That first your father dies, and then you die, and then your son dies. You would wish something worse than that on your family? You want your son to die quickly? Is that what you're asking for? The man had a great insight at this time. Now, this virus, of course, I'm going to say a controversial statement so that you can emotionally prepare yourselves. This virus kills many people, mostly old people. And I would say old people should die. Yes, it's controversial. You might ask, how can you say that? You're evil. You want old people to die. To which I'd say, but everyone dies, and when you're old is a good time for that. It's a very reasonable time to die, when you're old. Would you prefer that young people die? Is that what you want? You hope children die? We die. That is our nature. To fight against nature is suffering, and it's the way of the world. This is what we're doing now. We've come to the point when we believe that for a human being to die is wrong, is bad. And this is because we've identified death, and in fact we've identified nature as some kind of enemy. We look at the way things are, at nature, at people being born and dying. The parts of it that we like, we think are our friends. The parts of it that we don't like, we think are our enemies. We want to destroy death without noticing the obvious hypocrisy in that. We hold to it rather than seeing that the issue, the actual issue on the planet is our own minds. That is the source of suffering. And that's the source of killing. That's the source of injustice. It's the source of evil. It's also the source of good. Harmony, compassion, love, justice, wisdom. The question for us is one of cultivating and purifying our minds. That is the central question. And those people who use an opportunity like this to see that the question here is a purification of our minds, a cultivation of our minds, those people use an opportunity like this to transcend suffering, overcome the problem of death, and in this way, be willing to die. A person who's willing to die saves the world. A person who's willing to die prevents death. It sounds strange, but a person who's willing to die awakens to that which doesn't die. Because of awakening to that, it's no longer necessary to kill. And in this way, we completely change our society. But those who enter a situation like this and think that the problem is a virus, the problem is nature, the problem is that my nature is to die, the nature of my loved ones is to die, those use the situation to go even deeper into delusion, cause even more suffering, and in fact, increase the amount of killing that our species commits. We have the sense that what we need is more power. We need more control. We're not willing to surrender. We're not willing to voluntarily be crucified. No, we want control. We draw our sword and cut someone. We cut somebody's ear off, for example, as is recorded in the Bible. Because we're threatened by what? We have to see that we're threatened by our own minds. This is very difficult for people to see, that exactly the thing that runs our lives is the source of the problems in our lives. And this mind isn't just our own mind, isn't just an individual mind, it's a collective mind. It's a group awareness. Just like the trauma that we've experienced as we've experienced pandemic after pandemic over the centuries has been stored up in us collectively. We collectively respond. In the same way, we need to learn how to collectively purify our minds. This is a matter of relationship. When we look at this sutra on the origins and the other on good governance, things get more and more complex and society becomes more and more sophisticated. And more killing happens. Until we come to this terrible stage, a horrible stage, in which we are all responsible for a horrifying destruction of life. Everyone is responsible for it. A very few people draw themselves out of this mass killing. They decide not to participate in it. Very, very few draw themselves out of this mass killing, but almost everyone is engaged in a mass destruction of life. Society is undermined. Civilization collapses. Nature is destroyed. And it's not hard to see why the Buddha would describe this. Because even then, 2,500 years ago, you could see the direction that things were going in. People's ability to conduct mass killing was increasing then as now. People's destruction of nature was increasing then as now. Consider that 2,500 years ago, the Buddha laid down rules to prevent deforestation and water pollution. He could see all this happening then. He laid down rules to prevent inequality, at least in his own community. He could see what was happening even then. It's not hard to see. We have seen this general trend of inequality in society, of gradually increased power by the church, the market, and the state. Nowadays, mostly the market and the state. Controlling more and more people. And you could see that this direction isn't slowing down. We continue to go this way. And so you could say it looks like this. In the future, things are going to get really bad. Of course, we have acclimated to it. We're accustomed to a world in which species go extinct all the time. To a world in which there's shocking inequality. Far more than there was at the time of the Buddha. And incomparably more than there are in traditional societies. And small tribes, for example. We're accustomed to the sense of, well, yes, naturally at any time there could be a terminal war that kills me and everyone I know. The vast majority of people alive in a matter of hours. We just live with that and we become accustomed to it. We're not horrified by it anymore. But this is the problem. It's a problem of our minds. It's a problem of our minds. And so the question is asked in the text, well, what is it? What is it that's going to turn things around? Is it just going to be that everyone dies? Is that the end of this? Everyone kills everything and that's the end? The Buddha predicts that no, something will turn this around. We will all participate, as we are now in this economy. All of us participating, except a very, very few, in the mass destruction of life, the mass killing of most of the humans as well. He predicts that will happen. Very sad, of course. We don't want it to happen, but it will happen. And then something will change. And what is it that will change after this has occurred? I think we're very afraid of this happening right now. We're very afraid of the fact that we, due to our own minds, are destroying life on the planet. And so we get excited when there's something like the coronavirus killing a few million people. Feel like, oh good, finally there's something we can do about this other than purifying and cultivating our minds. Because that's hard. So good, now we can do this little work, which is much easier. Just be imprisoned for months. And it'll work. Somehow it'll get rid of all these problems. Oh good, because we're terrified of what now science also is predicting will happen. And then in this state, something will shift. And what is it? It is that people will become so lonely that they are finally glad to see each other. And that's the basic shift in all of human history. That is the fundamental change that happens. That brings us from a human history of increasing destruction of life, to the willingness to cultivate our own minds and be in harmony with life. That's the shift. The moment comes when we feel so lonely that we see each other and say, oh, I'm so glad to see you. And that's what shifts. And then the next thing that happens is that we think, well, what happened? That was terrible. That was horrible. What was the source of that? It's because of our own minds. It's because we were behaving in unethical ways. It's because we weren't concerned about the destruction of life. And then it puts it out, and when you read it, it's almost like a joke, but this is what we're really looking at right now. We're looking at, wait, maybe we shouldn't kill each other. This is what's drawn out. Maybe we shouldn't kill. I don't know. Maybe we should. Maybe not, though. Really? Maybe. Well, let's try it. Let's try not destroying life. And then they try it, and things get better. Think, it worked. Wow. That's fantastic. We are able to cultivate our minds so that things get better due to our better choices. What should we do next? Let's not steal from each other anymore. Well, I don't know. Stealing is pretty good. Let's try it, though. Let's just give it a shot. Well, okay. I mean, we'll try it briefly. And then they do. And things get better again. Look, it worked twice in a row. Cultivating our minds so that we behave in more ethical ways seems to be highly effective. What else should we work on? And they just keep on working on this, and the world becomes a better and better place. So how do we make this happen sooner? See, that's the question. We've already proven most of the sutra right. And as far as we need to know, we did it already. We've already destroyed life a lot. Maybe we don't need to destroy life anymore to get to the point when we feel lonely enough to consider the possibility that maybe we should cultivate our minds. Loneliness is an incredibly big problem right now. Maybe we've made it. Maybe we did it. Maybe we're there. And we can consider, it's kind of nice to see you, actually. Maybe we shouldn't kill each other. Have we gotten to that point? I don't know. Maybe. But I can tell you that my goal is to make it so that human beings will as soon as possible realize that we shouldn't destroy life. That's my goal. When will it happen? I don't know. I don't even know if the sutra is making an accurate prediction. Maybe we will destroy all of life on earth. I don't know. But maybe we'll get to the point when we realize, let's not. And we have to realize that as a community. There is another famous text in which the Buddha talks about 4 types of horses, 4 types of excellent thoroughbreds, as it's put. So one type of horse, if you just raise the goad, it immediately bursts forth into achieving the task at hand. Another one, you have to gently touch it with the goad, and then it bursts forth and does what must be done. Another one, you have to really hit it, cut into its flesh, and then it jumps forth and does what must be done. And the final one, you have to beat it until you hit the bone itself, and then it finally bursts forth and does what must be done. And he says there are 4 kinds of excellent human beings as well. There are those who simply hear about death. They just hear about death, and then immediately they deal with the problem. They do what must be done. There are those who need to know someone, actually know someone who dies. And then they burst forth and deal with death, deal with this problem, do what must be done. They stop resisting their own nature, which is to die, and in that way awaken to that which does not die. And then there are those who have to personally experience a near-death encounter, maybe sickness, something like that. Injury. And then they realize, I must do what must be done. This is the fourth. People who have to personally experience it. The fourth kind of excellent person. When they've personally experienced it, their own direct experience of almost dying. Then finally, they've been struck to the bone, as it's put. And then finally, they're willing to deal with this problem. Finally willing to face it and resolve the problem of death so that they no longer are prone to killing. Our challenge, of course, is how can we bring ourselves from the sort of horse that has to be beaten until the goad strikes the bone, having ripped away all of the flesh. How do we get to the point when we just have to see the shadow of the goad? How do we do that? That's a big problem for each of us. But there's an even larger problem, which is how do we do that for our society? So that our society itself looks at death and uses it as an opportunity to cultivate our minds, to do what must be done, deal with this problem as a society. This is the point. The text says that we have to have a lot of destruction of life before we realize that we're finally lonely and probably we shouldn't do this anymore. We finally realize that. But we, with our practice, can make it so that happens sooner and sooner. The challenge for us is how do we get to the point where our society makes this shift before destroying all life, and even better, before destroying much more life. That's the work that we do. Getting human beings to the point when we can face this problem, resolve this problem by cultivating our own mind, seeing that that is the issue. We are unwilling to have our nature, but we give in to that nature, and in being willing to die, we awaken to that which does not die. And we aren't threatened anymore in such a way that we would be prone to killing. So how do we actually do this for ourselves and for our community? How do we get to the point where our community will make this shift sooner and sooner and sooner? That we ourselves will make this shift sooner and sooner so that we ourselves have dealt with this problem, no longer have this terrible fear hanging over us, and also that our society has dealt with it so that we no longer destroy life. How do we do it? The answer is extremely clear. Be in a community that does this. That is how. Be in a community that does this. Your practice, the depth of your practice, the speed of your practice, is impacted by nothing more. There is nothing that impacts the depth, the velocity of your practice more than the people you spend time with. Nothing. Nothing has a larger impact than that. To be in a community of people who are attempting to face death, resolve the problem, will increase your likelihood of being willing to do it. But beyond that, it's by being in community that we create a group healing, a group maturation, so that our collective intelligence deals with the trauma of the past, that our collective intelligence is holding. So look at this community. How have we dealt with this? Well, first of all, we started dealing with it a long time ago. We eat good food, we're in nature, we exercise, and we have friendship. That means that we're far more immune, and so when this virus came through our community, it had no more impact than any ordinary cold. As I said before, you can say it's luck, but as a Buddhist and as an economist, I don't tend to look well on luck as an explanation for things. It happens. I'm not saying there's never chance. Just saying that isn't a very satisfying explanation. Beyond that, we have seen in the long term, you could say 7 generations, you could say 1,000 years, you could say 10,000 years, you could say more than that. Seeing in the long term, what are the impacts? Beyond that, in meditation, we come to the point of feeling connected with all living things. So we're part of a local community that is concerned with the global situation. And this global situation includes all life on Earth, not only human beings. And we are able to collaborate in order to deal with the problem successfully because we're a close-knit community. And so we deal with it on practical levels, of course. But most important is that we deal with it by using it as a chance to face death. And we've put a great deal of time into that. A great deal of time has been put into this. Half an hour a day. For weeks, we spend looking at this problem of death, facing it, and resolving it, and seeing that resolving the problem of death does not mean preventing human beings from dying. That is not how you solve the problem. The problem of death is solved in the way Jesus solved it. Be willing to die. What is it that brings us to the point where we're finally willing to join a community where we can experience this? We're finally willing to exit a world in which it's all about thinking and measurement, that's how we solve problems like this. Think more, measure more, believe in numbers, like how many people have died from a certain illness, calling that the basic standard of understanding. How do we transcend that mind of thought, measurement, self, clinging, aversion, conflict? What is it that brings us to the point where we're finally willing to enter a community like this? It's simply loneliness. And I've been amazed to watch what's happening to people as they become more lonely. I feel confident that the number of deaths from the loneliness that our reaction to this crisis has caused, caused enormous loneliness in the world. I'd be very surprised if that loneliness doesn't kill more people than the virus would have if we had done nothing. Loneliness is extremely lethal in many different ways. And so we come to this point of loneliness, and we realize we have to make a shift. To make a shift in how we live. And that change in how we live is about joining a community. That means actually moving. And it's a big project. It's hard. To really be part of a community of people who are trying to face this problem in a way that the human species has, as a whole, not done, but which people have been doing ever since the beginning. This is the opportunity that this crisis offers us, either to go further and further into the mind of conflict and control, or to go further and further into the mind of surrender and harmlessness. If we can allow this loneliness, this demand that we look at death to change our minds, and that changes our history. And in this way, we see the enormous power that we have at this moment. The power that we have over the future of life on the planet. The power that we have over our own suffering. We have enormous power right now. Let us make use of it.